We are live now. We can go ahead.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. In today's episode, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Meghna Krishnadas, a scientist whose journey bridges hospital corridors and forest trails. Trained originally as a medical doctor, Dr. Krishnadas chose to step away from clinical practice to ask much larger questions about life itself. Questions about biodiversity, coexistence, and the intricate patterns that shape ecosystems. Now an ecologist at the National Center for Biological Sciences, Dr. Krishnadas explores the when, where, and why of biodiversity, seeking to understand how species interact and assemble into communities in a rapidly changing world. This transition from activist to scientist was driven by an urgent realization. Biodiversity is being lost at alarming rate, and meaningful action must be rooted in knowledge. Along the way, awe, curiosity, and a deep sense of wonder for the complexity of life beyond powerful motivations. She leads the community and functional ecology lab, a motley crew of researchers working to uncover the hidden rules of biodiversity and species interactions in a complex world. Beyond science, Dr. Krishnadas is a reader, a writer, an explorer of new fitness regimes, and a lover of good books, great conversations, and gastronomy, with a dream of someday farming a little of our own food. Join us as we dive into Dr. Meghna Krishnadas's journey, her science, and her visions for understanding and conserving the living world around us.
Thank you, Akash, and everyone else on the team. Thank you so much to SciComm Synapse for giving me this opportunity to share some of my work with you and some of the ideas that we in the Community and Functional Ecology Lab at National Center for Biological Sciences like to work on. So I know this is more of a conversation and we're going to sort of have a chat about things in some time, but I'll allow me to just make a very brief presentation for perhaps there may be those in the audience who are not very well versed or don't know exactly what doing ecological science as an everyday business means, or what are the kind of questions that we sort of seek to ask and understand from in ecology, particularly because natural systems are so broad, so diverse, so complex, and as a scientist we can often take one small part of things and address those. So let me just give you a brief overview of the small part of this natural world that we have chosen to ask and understand in our lab. So just give me a minute to start sharing my screen, if that's okay, Akash.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. All right. Right. So very broadly, the focus of the work in the Community and Functional Ecology Lab, the logo of which you see here, which we like to call ourselves the Cafe Lab at NCBS, likes to understand or seeks to understand what is happening to biodiversity in these times of enormous changes happening at global scales, right? The planet today is changing faster than ever that we know of in sort of recorded human history. And while we know of many of these changes affecting human communities, they also affect other life forms around us. And some of what we seek to understand is what are the effects on these other life forms, and how do we understand what the implications might be in terms of the future of biodiversity on this planet, right? Um, so you walk into a tropical rainforest, or if you've had the good fortune of diving into a coral reef, you will see that this these immensely complex ecosystems are made of many species. And it has always fascinated ecologists that, when you have so many species in a place, how have they come to be? How do they coexist together to form a community? Why is it that one or few species don't outcompete everything else? And do we have certain features of species or certain aspects of species that can help us predict why some of them are dominant, why some of them are rare, and how do these rare species persist? Because when you have a lot of rarity, we see that we also have a lot of diversity in these communities. right? So this essentially forms the core of the curiosity driven questions that we ask in our lab, which is that when you see this pattern of, when you see diversity of life on earth, what are the patterns and processes that seem to generate and maintain this diversity? And of course, this question can be asked at many different scales. Like if you scale out to the size of the globe, there are historical processes, evolutionary processes, biogeography that we talk about, right? Which shows us or tells us why is it that we see biodiversity is not uniformly distributed across Earth. We see here, for example, that the tropical regions, which is between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and particularly around the equator, hold some of the most biodiverse places on Earth. This is an example for plant species, and the dark green ones are more biodiverse communities. And you see that diversity decreases at this global scale as you go towards the higher latitudes. Now, this is an example of a question that has fascinated ecologists, and we in the lab have also looked into some of these questions at smaller scales, perhaps, but to understand that as the climate varies across large spatial scales, what kind of diversity patterns do you see? Do you see that species are turning over? What kind of species prefer dry areas, wet areas, or can do well in warm sites versus cold sites? And we also try to understand that when you have these species changing across these areas, do you see changes in species interactions? And when we dive deeper in, let's say we go to one place, we see this very common pattern, or often common pattern, that there are few species that are common and they dominate the community, but most species are rare. So like I mentioned just before, what drives these differences between species and what are the implications of rarity? Can rare species be maintained in a community? Do we see signals of processes that we know based on theory and conceptual knowledge of these systems are required for rare species to stay in the system? These are also some of the kinds of questions that we like to answer. To sort of summarize in terms of what the Cafe Lab does in terms of the goals with ecological questions, is we want to understand the pattern and processes driving biodiversity, right? So what explains where species are found on Earth, right? Or across large scales or small scales. It can be across, like going from the south of the Western Ghats to the north of the Western Ghats, or it can be going across a gradient of, say, dry to moist soils in a small forest. The question pertains to it has many different implications and significance. And then we like to know, why are some species common, others rare? What allows persistence of rare species? But most importantly, how do species interact with each other? Because, when we think of a community, what we are thinking is not one or two species in isolation. We are thinking of many different species coming together, and which means that they're going to compete with each other or facilitate each other, or they're going to interact with other organisms. And this is something we like to study. The focus of many of these questions in our lab is plant communities. A lot of people see animals and find animals attractive. They're really cool. You see them move, they have bright colors, and birds fly and butterflies hover around. But eventually, when it comes down to the fundamentals of life on Earth, plants form the foundation of all life, without which we won't have all of these other higher levels of biodiversity that we see, right? And plants are also, I hope you will believe me when I say this, plants are super cool in the kinds of things they do. They have these hidden, mysterious lives that we don't see because we think of them as green and brown backgrounds for the most part, right? Or in terms of carbon. But they do a lot of cool things, and this is something we like to study and like to understand. But also the massive environmental changes that are happening in the globe, such as loss of habitats, fragmentation of habitats, deposition of nutrients, change in the climate, invasive species coming into places, are disassembling many of the plant communities as we know them. And today, more than ever, we need ecological theory to understand how this process of disassembly might take place, or what are the drivers, and how this might shape the kind of communities we see in the future, right? So to get at some of these questions, we work in many different places in India. A lot of my own work there's a history of work, over a decade of work in the Western Ghats Mountains, which is primarily in the tropical humid or rainforests, as known popularly, humid forests of Western Ghats. But we have also now expanded our work to to the woody savannas and dry forests of Eastern Ghats, and going into systems as far up as the Himalayas and grasslands, which I'm very excited about. And this is something that is happening because of the, driven by students and the kind of interest that they bring in. And just to delve into some of the specifics, a lot of the work that we have done so far focuses on human modified forests. So we have a long-term project that is going on, which is looking at how habitat fragmentation affects plant communities. The focus has been on regeneration, which is to look at young seedlings, which is in some sense the future plant community that you might see, right? And am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, sorry, just wanted to check. The video got frozen there. And also when we see that these sort of human modified forests, how are they responding when the climate is changing from year to year? So we have these long-term monitoring plots where we, in the seedling plots, for example, we tag every individual seedling, as you can see here, and then we monitor their fate. What is happening to them from year to year? What happens in a dry year or a wet year? How do they do when they're in a site with a lot of nutrients versus less nutrients, lot of light versus less light? And with this, we can hope to predict or forecast what the future of the community might look like. And a lot of these questions we are asking in terms of edge effects, like what happens at a forest edge. When you have a large patch of forest, you chop it up, you create these edges. Do the edges behave and respond differently to climatic fluctuations as compared to interior and more, shaded, more pristine conditions of forest? And so to do this, we try to understand, okay, how do these seedlings respond to different levels of light, water, aspects of the soil, such as nutrients, and also perhaps micronutrients, those kind of things. But as I mentioned, species interactions, plants are engaged in a constant exchange, a constant dance, as it were, with so many other organisms, things that eat their seeds, things that feed on their leaves, microbes in the soils that can help or hinder plants. They have them like mycorrhizal fungi that help to acquire nutrients, or pathogens which very strangely can be useful for maintaining plant diversity. And this is something that a lot of my previous work has looked into, and what we're also continuing to focus on. And these are things that these are hidden interactions, and this is something that we really like to explore in our lab. And we measure some features of plants, like what are the characteristics of their leaves and stem and roots, and how do these things map onto how they respond to light, water, or nutrients, or how vulnerable they are to pathogens in the soil, or how well they can acquire mycorrhizae. Do they even need them? And then we try to use this to make predictions that are more general. Instead of just focusing on one or two species, can you make some inferences about the community? Right? So that was a broad, very quick overview of the kind of work that we like to focus on, very broad sense of the questions that we like to ask. But do check us out on the NCBS website, which also links to our lab website. If you want to know more about our work, if any of you are interested to look at some of our publications and ongoing work, do check us out, and feel free to write in if you have ideas for internships, or you want to engage with the work in the lab, or just want to chat with us at some point and visit us. We would be more than happy to accommodate you. And with that, thanks, Akash. I'll hand it back over to you.
You have already covered a lot of stuff that we wanted to ask about.
Yeah, no worries. It must be very quick, so we can always now go through things in detail. I'll just stop sharing my video. Is that fine?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the work you're doing is the need of the hour, because we think that space is the future, and technological advancement and more infrastructure, more consumption, and we're working on the space that is getting affected because of our greed for more growth. So the questions we have got curated is: you began in medicine and chose ecology instead. What made you trust that decision? Because people are starting also, they are having, my friend, he took MBBS, but he took MSc biology as a backup. If he does not get MBBS, he'll have that degree. So
okay.
How did you take that decision and you have a trust in yourself and then to portray it to your family and people around?
Right. Okay, great question. Very complicated question. I don't know if I have a short answer to that. But I can start off by telling you that I didn't really have a lot of faith or have a lot of clarity on where I'm going to go with this career shift that I have. Right. It happened very gradually in fits and starts. But what happened was somewhere, I think as a student who was, I mean, I was a fairly decent student and someone who liked biology and who liked what we would call the life sciences. I would sit in the library and read about genetics and like the like DNA and RNA and those cellular processes for the longest time. Not ecology, by the way. I didn't have that exposure in school at all, except for watching some kind of National Geographic. But yeah, for someone who really enjoyed biology, but was also decently good at other aspects of science like math and physics, they were like, oh, you should just, you can do well in all this, so just do medicine because it's the standard career for someone like you. And so that's what I did. But I think somewhere in medical college, I realized that this is not quite what I want to do. I wasn't enjoying it as much as I hoped and thought that I would. I wasn't quite sure why, but at some point, I had the good fortune or the accidental fortune of going to forest to visit a friend who was working there. And that was my first visit, and like it was a game changer because I just realized that this is an experience I've never had. And it is the walk in the forest was perhaps at that time the most remarkable experience, life changing, so to speak, now when I look back, that I had ever had, right? And so maybe it started there, and I started like watching birds, doing a bit of natural history. I got this opportunity to volunteer with some organizations that were doing ecological research, and that sort of got me thinking that, oh, so people can actually do this for a living. You can look at this as a scientist. There's a career here which is possible. And over time, I slowly had to figure out for myself, meandering around, how do you do something like this? Fortunately, a new course, a master's course, came up in NCBS at that time, which didn't need a bachelor's in zoology or chemistry or one of those standard things, and they could take in someone like me. So I got the opportunity to do a master's in wildlife biology, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I guess there's been no looking back since.
Thank you very much for giving us a picture of how you choose you chose that. Going on further, many students fear leaving a safe career path, as I also mentioned in the previous question. What would you tell someone who is standing at that crossroads today and going to make a decision towards natural sciences or towards ecology?
Yeah, I think that is certainly a valid concern even today, right? It was a lot more back in my day. I'm talking like, 20 years ago, 15, 18 years ago. But even today, I think there is a certain sense of security that one feels with in a career that has a lot more opportunities like medicine or engineering or CA or whatever it might be, right? More conventional things. And I do agree that the opportunities in science are more limited. I think there is also a demand for perhaps for a lot of excellence from you. If you really want to be in a top institution, it's really hard to get in. The jobs are really few. But things are changing. I think the opportunities are likely to go up. We are likely to, or we are hopeful that we will see a broadening of the kind of jobs we have in science as well. There are people who do science and then do, I also work for NGOs who work on more policy related aspects, who work on writing and journalism. So it's and just the training in science really helps them. So we now have, it's not, and then it's not also about just about doing science. You can also be interested in nature, in ecology, and consider a variety of career paths that might make the best use of what your strengths, skills, and interests are. Like if you like to write and if you like to tell stories, or if you're an artist, those are avenues that you could potentially follow. But I think at the end of it, somewhere it does come down to us making that call, right? Like there is an element of risk. You don't know, you can't predict. Like if you get a medical degree, you're pretty sure of getting a job somewhere, right? But if you do science, if you have a PhD, or if you want to do something in ecology or conservation or wildlife, I can't say it. It would be dishonest of me to say that yes, there is this path and that you're going to get something. But most people who do this are really passionate about what they do, and I think maybe things pan out and you find a way to figure out where you're going with this. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's all rosy, and I think you have to. And this also sometimes makes it very privileged. I appreciate that there is an element of certainly an element of bias in who gets to choose these sort of careers, who has the buffer to choose these sort of careers. And we hope that in time we can create systems where we can absorb more of these interested, passionate people who care about nature and ecology and conservation.
So, as you mentioned, that one has to choose from their own interest and one has to be dedicated, and one has to consider their own financial conditions and if they can make the choice at that moment. But there are many
Mhm.
avenues. But I will move on to the next question, that you have also been an activist. So, the instincts you had while you were an activist and now the work of a scientist, how it changes and how you are, how was that journey?
Yeah, great question. I think life as an activist sometimes can be very fulfilling, because you feel this surge of passion, you feel a sense of righteousness that I'm doing something
Yeah.
that matters, and this, I'm going to try and make a difference. And the thing is, even if you don't make a difference, the fact that you tried, that makes you feel really good, right? But I think somewhere I was also realizing that there are many ways to be an activist, or well, there are many ways to, I wouldn't say activist, but there are many ways to speak for nature, to uh, to garner support for nature. And at some point I just felt that being an activist alone, or just being talking about conservation alone, wasn't allowing me to do that. And somewhere there was also this thing of, science gives you more knowledge, also gives you a sense of working through information, or a way to work through information. It trains you to think logically and think skeptically. So you also start thinking about your own viewpoint, right? Which I wasn't really doing as an activist. I just like, I believe in this, I'm going to do this. And some of these things, yeah, like, of course, most of our natural ecosystems are under a lot of siege in India.
Mhm.
We are still losing things at massive rates. We still have some ways to go to ensure that there is ecological resilience and security, and that we protect the future of these many different species that share the spaces with us. Um, but uh, but yeah, at some point I realized I'm not sure if just hardcore activism is the only way. Maybe if I'm, even as a scientist, as someone who is a purveyor of knowledge, I could contribute and weigh in as an expert speaking on certain situations. So let's say that there is a dam being built, or there's a river being diverted, or there's a road going through a forest. I don't have to be on the street raising slogans in science, and I know there are many good people doing it, but I can also support them by showing that, hey, here is what we know from the science, here is what we know from the information, that why this might be not the best thing to do. And here is exactly what we can predict might happen to many of these species or to biodiversity if you have the road go through the system, right? And so I think we can all find a place for ourselves within the role that best suits what our personality and capability is, right? And yeah, like I mentioned, I think at some point I was also just fascinated by the process of science. I think I've always had a, going back to my story about that, what I was doing in school, I think I always had a fascination for knowledge and science and just how things work. And this was a great way to combine my newly discovered love of being outdoors with my already existing love of figuring things out.
Whenever things come to figuring things out, we always relate it to curiosity and engineering. So that's the engineering.
Right.
When people hear ecology, they often think
Mhm.
it's abstract or impractical. What does
Mhm.
an ecologist actually do?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I should have. I had one photo of, someone in the field doing exactly what we actually do every day. It can be quite boring. We go, let's say in our life, we go out there to a forest, and we go to this plot that we may have marked out, and we're going to measure a seedling. We're going to tag a seedling, check if it's alive or dead, identify what species it is. But I'm trying to make this too boring. As an ecologist, I think just like any scientist, over, like, let's say, the course of a couple of years, what we do is say, we observe a certain interesting natural phenomena. You go out to a grassland, you go out to a forest, you dive into an ocean, whatever your system of interest is, but you observe some interesting phenomena, and then you think, why is this happening? Is it because of this reason? Can you figure this out? Is there an experiment I can do? Or is there a certain study that I can set up to observe the way certain things happen based on what I think I understand of the system so far? Can I draw upon information that is already existing in similar systems or for similar conceptual problems, right? This is the literature development part of it. And then I set up my study. Then I would go to this place, actually collect the data by making all the measurements that I need to make. I will come back, that may range from anywhere between like 3 months or a few weeks to many, many years. Like I mentioned, long-term forest monitoring that we do and many people in India do, and across the world. And this is like data being collected for decades, that we are talking about, that is generated over decades. Yeah, because some ecological systems are, they're slow. Like a tree can live for 100 years. How do you know what is happening, right? And when you look at things in the short term, the changes may not reflect what the average of the system is in the long term. You might just catch an anomaly, or you might catch the mean, but you don't know. Unless you get the long-term variability, you can capture stochasticity, you don't know how to separate the signal from the noise. And so some questions are asked over decades. The nature of the system may be such, right? But yeah, that's kind of so I would collect my data, I would come back to the lab, then I would sit on my computer, and I'm going to most likely run a lot of statistical models. Some may be simple, some may be really complex, depending on the nature of the data, the nature of the question. And then I try to make inferences from those statistically valid patterns that I might see in my data. And then I want to write it up and then talk about it and share it in forums such as this. But that's what I would say life as an ecologist would mean for the most part.
You have made a picture for us, and now we know that what happens. Maybe an ecologist is a statistician also, and they are always in the start of the day. They are with the forest, taking samples, writing down regularly there. I think after the farmer, you are spending the most time with nature.
Yes. So a lot of, for example, there are people in my team, my field team, for example, who can spend up to like many months in the field at one shot. Even PhD students have done that because their data takes many months and they've lived in a forest. We like rent a small house in a village close by. We have a jeep that we drive to where our sampling sites are. We do this every day. They live in those places, and until the data is collected, let's say for a PhD project or for that year, and then they would come back. But some people, like the field team, for example, there's a team that just stays there for the most part. They come visit us in the lab once in a while, but for the most part they stay in the field. So people do different things. But I think the biggest thing is a lot of people just like to be out there, right? Like they really enjoy the idea of being in a natural system. And that's not just a forest. There are people who do great marine ecology, right? There are people who work on grasslands. There are people who work in like savannas, what is called a savanna, which is a mix of tree and grass, or deserts. There are people who do fantastic work in deserts. So I think it just depends on what you like, and who knows why you like that. But people just love to be out there in a system of choice, studying, say, a species or a question of choice.
Thank you very much. So I would like to take it towards that. What kind of impact can ecological research have in the real world? If you could put some light on it.
Yeah. So I think that we need to first define what we mean by things in the real world, right? Are you just talking about human-centric needs, or are we talking more generally about, say, saving a species, saving an ecosystem, or being able to predict and manage some of these ecosystems for the future? Right. So I think it would depend on that. An understanding of ecology of some systems like rivers, right, or fishing, like fisheries, those are ecological questions that have a direct bearing on human livelihoods and human well-being, right? Um, and in some cases there are many people whose livelihoods are dependent on natural ecosystems around them, like pastoralists or those who harvest, say, certain products from the forest or live in the forest. And understanding some ecological aspects can be directly beneficial to their lives. But oftentimes, I think where the a bulk of ecological knowledge comes in is for the conservation of species and systems. So, like I said, if you're going to put a road through a forest, what would that mean for that forest? Right? How do we know what, before we put that road, how do we know what changes to anticipate? On what basis do we do that? And from other studies in other places, do we know what are the long-term shifts that might happen? So I think the role of ecology really is to be a knowledge repository, or the ecological science is to be a knowledge repository for addressing these applied or questions of conservation concern. And you pull a lot of people who are doing their work are not doing it because they want to actually address a conservation problem, but they're doing it because they want to understand the system. But when a lot of such knowledge builds up, somebody studied, let's say, just some frog, but the next time you put a road through that forest, that person knows, oh, look, there's a frog here. This is the ecology of the frog, right? And if you put a road through here and you make this area, say, drier or something like that, or you dam this place and then you create like a very dry condition here, this frog is not going to persist here anymore because I know these are its ecological requirements, right? That's where the science comes in, that you have a baseline, a foundation of knowledge on which you can pick from when you have to make a case for, say, saving a species, saving a system, preventing damage to a system. But also in today's world, like with climate change happening, with warming, with changes in like climatic fluctuations becoming prominent, we know that this has implications for things like carbon storage, nutrient cycling, and these are ecological questions. And if you want to, say, manage or conserve your systems to ensure that carbon is stored adequately so that you don't have warming just accelerate tremendously, you need to understand what drives the process of carbon storage, what increases it, what decreases it. Are some species better able to do this? Are there some species that are maybe more vulnerable to loss in the future? And would that affect how the ecosystem behaves in terms of nutrient cycling? Right? And these are questions, I think, that, again, ecologists will study just the questions or the process, but it has implications for how you want to manage your lands or what kind of mitigation measures you want to put in place.
Thank you very much. We get an idea that firstly, what impact are we talking about? Are we talking about just humans or the whole world and the climate in the whole sense? Further, I would say that we are seeing constantly there are species getting destroyed. I think that's why people are driven towards veganism and anti-imperialism. A person is born, the forest is going to be cut for it, and there'll be species losing their habitat. So, how you keep yourself hopeful while working on biodiversity loss?
Good question. I don't think I feel very hopeful all the time, but there are some days when I feel really dejected at the state of things, and at sometimes powerlessness at how little we are seemingly able to do. But there are also stories of hope. There are people who are doing some really good work on ground, and even like locally in their own area, they might have chosen a small area and they're going out there and trying to make a difference there, either for a species or just to save a patch of like natural ecosystems. And I don't know, honestly, if that will be enough for to sort of halt the kind of trajectory we are on with respect to the globe as a whole, with Earth as a whole. But those kind of activities do give, they give hope, right? But that said, I think, as I mentioned before, I think in India and generally across the world, we take place, in our policy, in the way we use resources, in the way we connect to natural ecosystems, and in our moral philosophy, I suppose, in what we think of, do we even need to conserve species? Should we do it? Or is it just that, because not everybody agrees to it, right? I don't think we can take it as a given. And this is actually a debate in like moral philosophy, like on what basis do you think that species should be conserved or systems should be conserved, especially if humans need it, particularly if there are certain, say, people who depend on things. But I mean, the problem is also one of equity. We are not living in a very equitable world. And I think there's a lot of misappropriation of resources. And what would really give me hope is we see us moving towards a more equitable world where we can reduce our use of resources and improve our distribution of whatever it is we extract, so that everybody can get a slightly better life, but alongside we can also have other non-human uh, life exist, not just for our own sake, but for their own sake.
Now I can also see some hope, and I can understand why you are striving with a smiling face every day. So the next question is: the cafe lab studies how species coexist. Why is this question so important right now?
Right. That's our, the basis of our existence, so to speak. So like I mentioned, when you put two or more species together to form a community, both common sense and ecological theory also seems to suggest that if you have one that is a better competitor, and that always happens, right? Like you can always have one species that does slightly better than the other species, and then this one should just, be able to explode and knock this one out of the system. And these are actually shown by some really simple mathematical models, and this is what the predictions are made through mathematical theory that has been developed. But the thing is, now the question is, this doesn't happen in nature. We see many of these species coexisting, and so then understanding how this happens is fundamental to understanding how diversity is maintained, right? Because only if one species just outcompetes everything else, there's no diversity. It'll be one species. It'll be a monoculture or monodominant condition, right? So at any point, if you want more than one species to be in a system, and we are talking about systems where we see hundreds of species making the community, that's a fundamental problem. How is this happening? Are they just using resources slightly differently? Do they interact with different organisms? Like, they have their own host-specific pathogens, which is sort of only working on its own host and, regulating each species population? Or is it, something that they have different good and bad years, and so over a long period of time, they can kind of remain in the system together? And there are all of these processes. Then we start studying which of these processes is important. And depending on where you are and what processes drive that system, then it would depend on, okay, if this system changes, let's say this system becomes warmer, this system becomes drier, or let's say this habitat becomes fragmented, how are these processes likely to change? And therefore, if species don't coexist as much as before, or the mechanisms that drive coexistence change, how is that likely to change diversity and community? That's why this question is important, right? So if you're thinking of biodiversity and maintaining biodiversity in many of these communities, we need to understand how these species are coexisting.
Thank you very much. Now we get an idea that why it is so important, and we ourselves, even we are living to a different people from different communities in a particular small city or even community. It's difficult for us to be together, and we see different species cohabitating so homogeneously. And I don't know if it's the word, so we can learn a lot from it. So
I think it's also important if you want to save biodiversity, right? Or preserve biodiversity for the future. So if you understand how the diversity is maintained, then you can maybe figure out better ways or make sure that the processes that enable diversity are not compromised in the systems.
Yeah. And we can make the right action and try to do the needful. So what skills matter most for the students who want to build a career in ecology? What skills would you suggest students to gather? I don't know, online courses or basic. What is the understanding I should have if I want to pursue ecology as well?
Go out in the real world. Don't do it online. All of that can be done at some point, but you need to go out in the real world, be in the field. That is something that we nothing gives you a better handle on being able to do ecological science than being out there in the field, you know, because this is, unless you've experienced it, it's kind of hard for me to put it in words. But when you go out there and you see this immense complexity of a system, and then you need to make sense of that complexity, sift through it to ask a good, solid scientific question, that's a very hard skill. And that comes not by reading papers. You have to read your papers, of course. You have to know your statistics. You have to learn many things. But asking a good scientific question really comes from knowing and being familiar with the reality of the systems you're working in. You have to immerse yourself in the systems you're working in. So go out there, I don't know, swim in the ocean, walk a forest, go through a grassland, try to identify what species there are. What are the birds in this place? Why are they different from the birds in another place? What butterflies do you see here? Do you see some places have more butterflies than others? What kind of insects do you see around? What plants are here and what plants are in some other place? Those are the things that you really need as the most important foundation to do ecological science.
Thank you very much. This was a very unexpected answer, because I think maybe being an engineer, we think on the skill front that I should be a good statistician, I should know biology well, I should know organic chemistry well. But,
right.
Should be able to ask the right questions and understand the pattern and have the curiosity for it.
Akash, so I just want to add to that. I think, and the reason, this is a really important question is, as you said, a lot of people think that you can be a good scientist or you can do good science by having a lot of skills. Skills will come. A lot of us and a lot of students who come in, they have the ability to pick up skills. But what is really hard is the ability to frame a research question based on your understanding of a system. That is the crucial skill to being a scientist. And for that, I think you need to, at least in ecology, you need to be out there in the world often, understanding your system. There are theoretical ecologists as well, and their role is very important because they're coming up with like more generalizable or general principles for how systems should work. They're using theory and mathematical modeling to make predictions or assess some of these systems. But none of that is valid unless it is confronted with real world data and confronted with what people see in the real world. And so that, I would say, is really important to being an ecologist.
Yeah, they are helping us get the tools, and we have to be on the forefront to see exactly where the change is needed and
make sense of those concepts. Yeah.
About your personal journey, looking back, what was your journey? Part of a journey that you're most proud of, that you think that I am happy very much, I'm very much satisfied, I have not even a percent regret for anything wrong. It was all perfect and I am very proud.
Deciding to do a PhD, I guess. I mean, a PhD is a very, unlike, I see a lot of students who like go from, say, a bachelor's to a master's to a PhD, right? I always took time. Like after my medicine, I took some time to decide what is it that I really want to do with respect to ecology or wildlife. After I finished my master's degree, I worked again and I took some time, which is, I think, very unusual today. But at that time, I didn't think so much about it. But I think that giving myself the time to really think for things on my own, work and understand things on my own, helped me become really, independent, and helped me be very confident when I went into a PhD and wanted to seek or frame questions for myself, right? And doing a PhD was an excellent experience for me because I really enjoyed those 5 years of delving deep into a problem that I want to understand, right? For all its worries and caveats and problems and whatever, it's a PhD is always a stressful journey. But I really enjoyed the process of figuring out the answer to this, or finding out what the answer to this question might be, what's going on in this system. And I think that that process has really developed my ability to think. It's not just about writing a thesis. It's about how it reshapes the process, reshapes your ability to synthesize information, think through knowledge that's there, and develop and build a new piece of knowledge and situate it in this wider scheme of things. And how do you do it in a robust way? And also gave me the chance to like leverage so many of my other skills like quantitative reasoning, quantitative analysis, writing, communication, engagement with peers. So I'm really glad that I went ahead with a PhD.
Now, I would like to move towards the audience questions. In YouTube comments, we
Okay.
have questions. Saumilya will
Okay.
share those questions with us.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Akash, for your such a great webinar, and we got a lot of questions on our YouTube. We'll see
Oh
how
wow.
much.
Okay. Nice.
So maybe I'll see. One second, just- yeah. Yes. So I'm the very I'll be starting from the question. That is
Okay.
from Ms. Pooja. He asked us explain the relationship between biodiversity and ecosystem stability.
Stability. Oh wow.
Biodiversity and system stability.
And ecosystem stability.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so this is actually a major field of research in ecology, which is to understand that if in a system, any given system, if you have a more diverse community, do you have the functions of that community, such as, let's say, carbon storage or seed dispersal or nutrient cycling, are those things more stable in the sense that they show less variation and fluctuation from year to year, regardless of, let's say, whether you have a dry year or a wet year, warm year or a cold year, the fluctuation will be less. And there are some theories for why this happens, right? If you have a very diverse system, you might have species with different kinds of features, different abilities. And so in a dry year, the species that does well in dry conditions will still maintain its function. And in a wet year, the opposite, the species that does well in wet conditions will have really good functioning, right? And so over time, their contribution to the function averages out. And there's also sometimes called like an insurance effect, that if you have more species, then you sort of have this portfolio that insures you against fluctuations. And that's sort of the very broad idea of relationship between biodiversity and stability that is proposed. And it's not, of course, the nature is not, of course, this simple, but this is just the concept that is there.
Okay, that's really great. Thank you, ma'am, for putting up the such a great answer. Next question we have is from Mr. Prabhar. He asked that like excision methods, what happens in if ecologists were not existing in this world only? What changes would happen in this world without ecologists?
I guess we just wouldn't get many of these really cool insights about these very cool uh, organisms that share the planet with us, and that would be, our life would be so much poorer, if we didn't imagine, if you didn't see all those um, really nice documentaries on BBC and National Geographic and Discovery Channel on what's happening in the African savannas, or how Amazonian rainforests have these mysterious lives of so many, creatures, or just the sheer splurge of color and form, and what different creatures are doing is just so fascinating. Like, I don't know if you've seen birds of paradise, but they're just beautiful. When you see what they're doing, you're like, wow. You go to a coral reef and you're just stunned. And I think without ecologists, many of these things you might be able to still see them, but you wouldn't quite know how these things work, right? Like, how does this come to be? What is the dynamics of how this thing happens? So I think we just sort of maybe um, give more depth and context to this very colorful natural world that we have around us, that we have on Earth.
So next question we have from some Good name. It is very good, cool name. So, but I
Okay.
so he asked that, ma'am, does your lab work on observational and data analysis stuff as well? And do
Hmm.
your lab also work on biotech perspective of ecology as well?
Mm. Yes, to both. We do a lot of observational work, and in fact, much of ecology is observational, and your studies are designed such that you can't really manipulate these systems, right? So think of it as, very similar to astronomy. If you want to understand, say, the formation of stars or the life of stars, you can't really create a new star to do that, or you can't, I don't know, like shut down an old star. You just have to observe things and make sure that you have the tools and techniques and the study design to make sense of those observations. So that's a lot of ecology. Like, there are these systems that for various reasons, like for either for ethical, legal, or whatever reasons, you can't always manipulate. So we do a lot of studies, or the scale of the study. If you want to study something at the scale of, say, the all of India, all of the globe, you can't manipulate things very rarely. uh, so we do a lot of observational work, and we combine that with cutting edge statistical models to ensure that, and good study design, rigorous study design that is irreplaceable, to make sure that we can make sense of this data that we are that's coming in. And in terms of biotic interactions, yes, that is a huge focus of work in our lab. And for those who may not know, biotic interactions basically means how organisms interact with each other in natural systems, right? So how a plant competes with another plant for water, or let's say how parasites on a bird can change what happens to, say, its reproductive success or something like that, right? Or what is the relationship between a predator such as a tiger and its prey, and how their numbers fluctuate. So these are all examples of biotic interactions, and that is basically the essence of life and diversity around us. So, of course, we don't study all of this. We study the interactions of plants, like I mentioned in my presentation. So we are really interested in understanding how plants interact with insects that eat their leaves, for example. What does that mean for the success of individual plants? We are really interested in plant microbe interactions in the soil, looking at the ecological aspects of it and understanding what the ecological consequences are, dispersal of seeds. Those are some of the things that we are definitely looking into.
Yeah, that's really great. So, ma'am, one question which is common in all audience that they want to work under your guidance.
Okay. Please feel free to write. And if we can have a chat, and we can see if the work we do is really suitable to your interests, and this is what you want to do. Otherwise, I can always suggest other people, other ecologists, who are working on other things, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with a wider network. But please do write in. Always happy to and have interested people come in and work with us and help us with what we do.
As a ma'am, I have sharing a NCBS file on the our YouTube chat box that
Okay. Okay. Right. So I can expect a few emails in my inbox today.
maybe Akash, can you mute yourself? I guess the your voice is echoing. Yeah. So, last question which I have from myself.
Mm-hmm.
When we go to some ecological tourist places like national parks and all, we see the view and take selfies and post on our
Mm-hmm.
Instagram. That's what here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a ecologist. So
Mm-hmm.
when you go to national park, what
Mm.
different view carry from us? Like we
Yeah.
go as we go for a sightseeing, but when you
Mm-hmm.
go for park, what different perspective do you have?
Mm. Thank you for that question. And I think that's it's also a really self-reflective question, and I really appreciate you asking it. Um, so yes, I do see that a lot of people who go to these places, the national parks and sanctuaries for tourism, they often treat it as any other place, right? Like going to a resort, or going to I don't know, a hotel, or just a seaside holiday, something like that. Actually, a seaside holiday can be a great time to do ecology, like natural history, but we leave that aside for the moment. But instead of going to a national park and just taking selfies, like you said, you could just slow down and watch what the world around you. Maybe this is not about you. Maybe the best experience is not about capturing this moment with something in the background, but you becoming the background and giving your attention to what's ahead of you. What is that tree that is having a certain kind of flower? What kind of insects do you find in that tree? What are these other, what do you sometimes people go and say, oh, I want to see a tiger, and they lose so much of the other things that are there around them in the world, right? So maybe the next time you go there, just leave the phone aside for some time and make yourself fade into the background and think of yourself as a visitor to these places, and really going to someone's house as a guest. And what would you do? You would be very mindful. You would pay attention to what they are thinking and feeling and behaving. And I use these words very generally, very generically, but I think my point is that just watch, direct your attention outwards to this most likely a very beautiful place around you. Watch what birds are there, see what insects or like what butterflies are flying around. What are there certain unique plants that you see? Are there certain unique features that you see about the habitat? If there is a lake, if something is happening by that lake, if you go to a seaside, you often just rush into the sea to kind of play around in the water, but do you see any birds around in the shore? And what might they be eating? Is everything eating the same thing? And these are just ways to maybe involve yourself more closely with the natural world rather than separate yourself by just taking a picture.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. So we are done with our most of the audience question, and I hope you might be receiving lot of emails today. All
Right. I look forward to it. And thank you once again. Thank you all so much for this opportunity to chat. And yeah, I hope that I've been able to share some of the passion and the excitement that we have for the kind of science we do and for the systems we work in. And yes, please feel free to write in, and I'd be happy to, engage with you and see where we can go from there.
I hand over the mic to Akash for the vote of thanks.
So, on behalf of SciComm Setups community, I thank Dr. Meghana Das for an insightful and inspiring conversation. Your journey from medicine to ecology, from activism to evidence-driven action, clarified what ecologists do and why their work matters now. Your reflections on biodiversity, coexistence, and real-world impact of research offered hope and guidance to students and I hope in practitioners alike. We are grateful for your honesty, your mentorship, and the urgency you bring to conserving the living world and the climate. I thank our audience and our team for making this episode possible. And Dr. Krishnadas, our warmest thanks for your time and wisdom. And you gave us a better understanding that what ecology is and why is it so much important and what personally we can do. And not just speaking about it, but also understanding it and being mindful of it, considering the whole world our own place and home. Thank you very much.
And thank you again. Yeah, it was a pleasure being here. Bye.
So please do feedback form, and it has been posted here. And please do like, share, and subscribe our YouTube channel. Yeah, thank
Once
you,
you fill the
everyone.
feedback form, you will receive the certificate. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, so stay tuned. We will be coming with some more exciting webinars in our next month. So do share, like, and subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you. And the feedback form has been posted. So please
You
don't
can fill the
forget.
feedback form to get the certificate.
Bye everyone. Bye bye. Have a good happy Sunday. Bye bye everyone.